Hello, everyone. This is Deanna Minnick. Welcome to the Detox Summit. Today, I have a very special guest. We have Dr. Tom OBryan. Now, many of you might know Dr. Tom OBryan because he hosted the Gluten Summit in November of 2013, and it was a smash hit. So much great information about gluten, about the physiological processes as they relate to the gut, and how gluten is a toxin. So what I'm hoping that Dr. OBryan can lead us down the path with today is talking a little bit more about this toxin in our everyday environment, in our food supply. And perhaps he will shed some light on non-celiac gluten sensitivity as well as celiac disease, because he's finding a lot as it relates to his research and in talking within certain circles of experts and really spreading the word about what we can do with gluten. So Dr. OBryan, welcome to the Detox Summit.
Thank you, Deanna. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Oh, it's really a delight to have you because you are, as we were just talking about, I see you as the gluten guy. When I think of gluten and really the charge against gluten and to help people find solutions, I think of Tom OBryan. So thanks for gracing us with your presence.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
So perhaps, for the listeners who don't know you as intimately, perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about your own personal journey as it relates to health and healing, and how did you get into gluten in general and gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity?
Well, 34 years ago, my ex and I could not get pregnant. And I was an intern at the time, and I called the 7 most famous holistic doctors I'd ever heard of at that time. And I asked them all, what would you do? And they all told me what they do. And I was writing furiously while they were talking because I'd never heard of some of these things, but I was writing it all down. I put a program together and we were pregnant in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And my neighbors in married housing, we lived in campus at the time, they had been through artificial insemination and nothing worked for them. And they'd asked if I'd work with them. And I said, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I don't think it's going to hurt you. And she was pregnant in 3 months. So I came out in practice ready to get the whole world pregnant.
Now that's a mission.
That was a mission. And we had lots of great success with recurrent miscarriages and infertility. And we helped many, many couples over the years. And what I discovered there in our first pregnancy, and then in every woman, literally every woman I've checked, and it's rare that you can say every with any health condition, but this is something I feel comfortable saying, every person that has reproductive disorders of one type or another, always, and once again, that's a word I rarely use, but I'm comfortable using it here, always have food sensitivities as a component of what's throwing their body out of balance. Always. And so the question is, and in my language, for people who've heard me speak before, all degenerative diseases, as far as I know, all degenerative diseases at the cellular level are inflammatory in nature. And so the guideline is stop throwing gasoline on the fire. And so when you have an imbalance in how your body is functioning, then the first thing we like to consider is what might be causing more inflammation. And with that, it's very, very common that food selections are a component of the inflammation that people are experiencing and manifests. You pull at a chain, the chain always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end, it's your heart, your liver, your brain, your kidneys, wherever your weak link is, that's where you're going to feel your symptoms when you pull at the chain too hard. And the major pull on the chain that I have found in my practice has been inflammation. That's the major pull on the chain. So stop pulling on the chain. How do you stop pulling on the chain? Stop throwing gasoline on the fire. Well, what does that mean? Well, you have to find the foods that your body might not be able to deal with as well as somebody else could. And that got me into all of this. And the most common food that we found time and time again, if you have comprehensive testing available to you, the most common food is gluten sensitivity. And the second most common food in my practice has been dairy. So consistently across the board, we take gluten and dairy out of people's diets before their test results come back. And they start feeling better in the first week or two.
I'm curious, Dr. O'Brien. So, gluten and dairy, and that has definitely come up from the other Detox Summit experts. JJ Virgin and Dr. David Perlmutter would contend that up at the top of that list would be sugar. And I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, technically speaking, maybe. But in my world, and maybe I've got a limited world in terms of the people that I see or that come to see me, most people know that you're not supposed to eat too much sugar, and they'll do some. And there are some people who are addicted and doing lots of sugar all the time. But my experience has been it's the ones that you don't know that are taking you down. And you think you can do a certain amount of sugar because you don't feel bad, but if you have too much, like my kids, they'll push the boundaries. They'll push the boundaries until they get sick and then they clean it up. And they've learned what their boundaries are and how much alcohol can they have or how much sugar can they have. And nowadays they're much, much more conscious of their diet than they were in their teens and early 20s. But they know their boundaries with sugar. It's the ones that you don't know about that I think have a major, major impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and does it seem like both of these sensitivities coexist? It's not like, so if somebody has gluten sensitivity, is there a much larger preponderance towards dairy sensitivity? Do you see them kind of hand in hand, or do they occur kind of individually as well?
Well, there's two phases to the answer to that question. The first one is the literature is very clear that for celiac patients, 50% of them have cross reactivity with dairy, 50%. And what that means is that they have a dairy sensitivity. And if they're still eating dairy, the body often thinks you're still eating gluten and your gluten antibodies stay elevated, but you're not having gluten. And it may be dairy because of the cross reactivity that's triggering the gluten antibodies to continue. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part is that most of the research in this world of gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, until a few years ago, the vast majority of the research is on celiac disease. The vast majority of the research. Now, that's important, but now we know, as of 2011, officially, it was christened that the umbrella term that we are to use, all of us, all clinicians, researchers, scientists, general public, the umbrella term is a gluten-related disorder. That's the umbrella. Now, underneath the umbrella, one manifestation is celiac disease. And that's where all the research has been for the last 50 years is on celiac disease. But now we know that non-celiac gluten sensitivity is at least 6 times, and some studies show up to 20 times more common than celiac. So it's just something that was never looked at and never differentiated in the past. So if we know that a dairy sensitivity occurs in 50% of celiacs, what's the percentage in non-celiac gluten-sensitive individuals? No one has written those papers yet. And I tell you that just to say, you're better off just getting them both out immediately for a trial period, 3 weeks to a month. And then when you're feeling great and you're noticing your symptoms reducing, you're feeling much better, if you want to reintroduce dairy in there, if you haven't had the right blood test done yet, and you're doing it by symptom patterns, then go ahead and reintroduce dairy. But just to make sure that you give your body a clean shot to begin with, do gluten and dairy together.
So when I think of gluten and dairy together, I think of protein. And then I start thinking about, well, are there other proteins? If we can't digest these particular proteins, these fractions, are we just protein intolerant? Are we protein sensitive? Is it just something within the pathophysiology of the intestine that's creating this reaction? Or is it very specific to these proteins? Because I've seen patients start to respond to, I'm starting to see now legumes, legume protein. And so I'm just curious about that. Is this a protein issue? Is it a gut issue? Is it a villi issue, or is gluten really the culprit?
Well, that's really a good question. And I just came back from the Therapeutic Protocols in Celiac Disease Conference in New York. And Dr. Detlef Schupan I believe he's a chair of gastroenterology at Harvard. I believe he chairs that department. And his emphasis was very clear we shouldn't be talking about non-celiac gluten sensitivity. We should be talking about non-celiac wheat sensitivity because there are other components in wheat besides the gluten proteins. The amylase trypsin inhibitors that Dr. Bill Davis's book, Wheat Belly, was focusing on so much. The lectins in wheat are called wheat germ agglutinins, and they have tremendous impact on pathology in the body. And there are hundreds of research papers on wheat germ agglutinins that may be the culprit. The fats that are in wheat are less than 1%, but for some people, that's the trigger. So it could be proteins. It certainly could be the proteins of gluten, the proteins of wheat, which are the gluten peptides. It could be, or it could be other components. That's the first answer that I would think of. The second answer is digestive dysfunction, that if we don't chew our food and have it coated with saliva, or if our bodies are not making enough hydrochloric acid in the stomach, maybe you've got parietal cell antibodies and there's an autoimmune process going on in your stomach, or you've got Heliobacter, which is a bacteria that hangs out in the stomach. And many people have this bacterial infection, which will affect hydrochloric acid production. Or maybe your body's not making enough pancreatic enzymes that have a little more of an indirect effect on protein digestion and utilization. Or maybe you don't have enough of the good bacteria in the gut, which is critically important in utilizing proteins. So there are so many factors in terms of digestive function that that GI tract is so critically important to address comprehensively. And my world of expertise has been to talking about one component that can throw your digestive tract out of balance, and that is a gluten sensitivity. But we want to keep the big picture. The umbrella overview is that you want a well-functioning digestive tract. That means making enough digestive enzymes, having the right environment down there with the good bacteria, not too much of the bad bacteria, all of that.
Dr. O'Bryan, do you think that many people, our listeners, for example, do have good digestive health? Do most people have to be concerned about their guts?
Oh my goodness, yes. Unfortunately, yes. We would like to think that we've got good guts. And unfortunately, with the world we live in today and there are so many factors to it. If we take the factor of antibiotic exposure, many of your listeners will say, well, I haven't had any antibiotics in years. And I would contest that and say, yes, you're getting antibiotics most every day because there's minute dosages that are sprayed on the vegetables. And you don't know, but unless you're getting organic vegetables, there may be antibiotic residue on them. Or another area of digestive dysfunction that we're exposed to every day is genetically modified foods, GMO foods, that they cause tremendous upheaval, subtle, but accumulative in the gut. So we have gut dysfunction. I believe, and this is my clinical experience, I can't say that I've seen the study on this, but I do believe that gut dysfunction is the number one culprit in our culture today. Whether you have stomach pains or not, dysfunction means that it's not functioning right. And if it doesn't function right, the only sign you may have is osteoporosis. And because you're not absorbing calcium and vitamin D and vitamin K, that's still digestive dysfunction. So I think the number one culprit in our culture today for many of the diseases that we're battling with is digestive dysfunction.
Well, I would agree with you 100%, especially if you look at the top-selling pharmaceuticals. We have proton pump inhibitors at the top of the list now,
Yes.
At least the latest data that I've seen. Dr. O'Bryan, I'm curious too. One of the other things that we talked about with Dr. Aviva Ram and Dr. Sarah Gottfried was soy. And I'm just kind of curious because there seems to be a soy phobia. And so when you mention gluten, dairy, and now you're being more specific based on this other researcher talking about wheat, that there could be other things. And, we start looking at grains and they start looking a little bit like legumes in some way. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on soy. Is that something that we have to think of as a toxin per se, or are there benefits to soy?
Yes and yes. Well, there's a couple of concepts to give your listeners to just ponder here. First, some docs, when I meet them, say, "Oh, you're the guy that thinks everybody should go off of gluten," and I say, "No, I'm not. That's never been my message. I'm the guy that says everyone should be checked to see if they have a gluten sensitivity." Because it's so common. If you don't have a gluten sensitivity, okay, well, can I eat gluten? Well, it appears, at least if your immune system's functioning normally and it's not being suppressed for a number of reasons that might occur, like inhalers or steroids that you've taken or something like that. So if you have a normal functioning immune system and it says you don't have a problem, then you don't have a problem right now. But if you carry the gene for celiac, you better check yourself every couple of years because you are going to cross that line at some point. So the reason I said that is that everyone needs to be checked as opposed to having a blanket statement, everyone this or everyone that. You want to see what your body is doing and responding to that's unique to you. Dr. Aristo Vojdani is a personal friend, and he's very clear on this. He said, everyone has a unique fingerprint. Everyone also has a unique immune print, and one person's immune system responds differently than another. And there's no shotgun term that you can use. Now, so the thing on soy is that there are hundreds and hundreds of studies that have shown benefits to components of soy. You can't argue with the studies. You might be able to tear one study down here or there, but there's hundreds of studies on this. And there are a few studies, as far as I know, just a few that say it's a problem. That doesn't mean it's not a problem, but I don't think people have looked at it as thoroughly as they're starting to look at it now to see, is there a problem or not? So my answer to the question is you just need to check and see if you have a sensitivity to soy. If you do, why would you eat anything that your immune system is having to respond to and fight, right? So
Well said.
You just want to check.
Mm-hmm. So how do we do that? How do we check for sensitivity?
Well, for our doctors that are listening, for some this will be new, perhaps, and for others not. And there are a number of common tests that are done checking the immune system for soy. A very common test, probably the most popular test, is checking the IgG antibodies for soy. Now, this is my thing to say that, your immune system is like the armed forces of your body. It's there to protect you. There's an Army, an Air Force, a Marines, a Coast Guard, a Navy, an IGA, an IgG, an IgM, an IgE. So if you're checking IgG, you're checking the Navy.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem, you got a problem. But if it comes back negative, maybe it's the Air Force that's out in force. Maybe it's the Marines and it's IgA. If IgA is out in force and you've got elevated IgA antibodies really working hard because IgA is more for the epithelial tissue, the lungs and the colon, the small intestine. So if the Marines are out in force, the Navy may not be active right now. There's no problem out on the oceans. And so IgG is normal. You may have an IgA reaction. So you just have to be comprehensive. So when you ask, how do you test? You want to look at IgA and IgG together at a bare minimum, because those are the two, my experience, most commonly associated. IgE, the skin prick test that most people have heard of or experienced when they were children, that's a good test. If it comes back positive, it's positive. But the studies that I've read show 45 to 48% of children and 52% of adults get false negatives on an IgE, meaning a test comes back and says there's no problem when they have a problem. It's just they don't have an Air Force problem. It's the Marines, it's IgA that's out in force. That's why the false negatives come back when you only look at one branch. So my suggestion is minimum IgA and IgG, and the more practitioners that demand this, the sooner more laboratories will be offering it as a package at a fair price.
So for the listeners, they're already probably thinking, well, I want to get this test. So how does somebody go about getting their IgA, IgG levels tested? Are there certain kinds of practitioners that should be seen for that purpose?
Well, in general, my impressions are that a functional medicine practitioner will be more aware of this concept, but many have not been introduced to this concept yet. but they would certainly be more receptive to the concept. And the only laboratory that I know of that is doing multiple branches of the armed forces for each antigen, and an antigen is something that stimulates an immune response, is Cyrex Labs, C-Y-R-E-X, cyrexlabs.com. And I have no association with Cyrex. I did in the past. I helped them open and was a consultant for them, but I have no association with them now. I just think they're the best tests available.
All right. That's wonderful to know. So, Dr. O'Bryan, perhaps you can take us through a journey into the gut. I know that you're, it's like all these G's, gluten, gut, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the actual physiology and what is happening in the gut. Why does the body have this reaction to gluten? Why is the body seeing gluten as a toxin?
You bet.
Tell us about the cascade, almost like we're in a little bubble together and we're diving down into the intestine. What's happening? What's going on?
Okay, that's really a wonderful question. Thank you. Your intestines are a tube. The tube is 20 to 25 feet long. Think of a donut. If you could stretch a donut out, so it's one big long donut, and you look down the hole, if you look down the center of the hole, it's one hole going down. That's your intestines. So when you eat food, it's really still outside your body until it goes through the donut into the bloodstream, right? It goes from one end to the other, and some of it goes through into the bloodstream. It's got to go through the donut. So now I'm going to talk about how does it go through the walls of the donut. So your intestines are a tube 20 to 25 feet long. The inside of the tube is lined with shag carpeting. This shag, they're called microvilli. This shag is where calcium's absorbed. This shag, magnesium. These shags, the good fats. These shags, the amino acids from proteins. All the shags absorb different nutrients. Celiac disease is when your shags wear down and you get Berber. You got no shags. You absorb no calcium or very little calcium. You get osteoporosis. That's why in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2006, they said that all osteoporotic patients must be checked for celiac disease, as celiac disease could be the cause of their osteoporosis. So I show that study and I say, so docs, what osteoporotic patient are you not going to check? Given that the Archives of Internal Medicine say every one of them needs to be checked. You just want to check. So you've got these shags. The shags are lined with cheesecloth so that only certain size molecules can get through into the bloodstream. And, it's like grandma pouring the gravy in the cheesecloth and only the liquid comes through and the clumps stay on the other side. So the clumps stay in the tube and they go further down for the digestive enzymes to break them down. Because food is, these big molecules, they've got to be broken down really small to fit through the cheesecloth. One of the things that happens with gluten, and it happens every time, we now know, the studies are clear, every time you eat gluten, you get tears in the cheesecloth. Now these larger molecules can get through, called macromolecules, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But every time you eat gluten, you have toast for breakfast, you get tears in the cheesecloth. But the fastest growing cells in the body are the inside lining of the intestines, right? Everybody knows every 3 to 7 days you have a new lining to your intestines. It's like the snake of a skin being shed. They grow really fast. So you get tears in the cheesecloth heals. You have a sandwich for lunch, you get tears in the cheesecloth heals. You have pasta for dinner, you get tears in the cheesecloth heals. Toast for breakfast the next morning, tears in the cheesecloth heals. Sandwich for lunch, tears in the cheesecloth heals. Have a cookie in the middle of the afternoon, tears in the cheesecloth heals. Until someday, somewhere down the road, you cross an imaginary threshold and it's the straw that broke the camel's back, you don't heal. Now you've got pathogenic intestinal permeability. Now you get these macromolecules, these big molecules that still have to go further down the tunnel of digestive juices to be broken down small enough to get through the cheesecloth. But now these big molecules can get through earlier because there's tears in the cheesecloth that don't heal. And these macromolecules get into your bloodstream, and your immune system says, whoa, what's this? This is not something I can use to make new muscles or new brain hormones called neurotransmitters. And your immune system makes antibodies to protect you. And now you get an allergic reaction to chicken or to beef, or to strawberries, or bananas, or mangoes, or coconut. And these are the people that are allergic to 15, 20, 25 foods when they do a 90 food panel. And you do a blood test looking for 90 foods you might be allergic to. You come back allergic to 15 or 20. You're not allergic to, well, you are because your immune system's responding. But when you heal the tears in the cheesecloth, wait 3 to 6 months, you're allergic to 2 foods maybe. So that is the basic mechanism. And we now know there are 2 things. There are 2 things that have been shown consistently every time to cause tears in the cheesecloth. That's gluten and lipopolysaccharides, LPS. Those are the 2, no question. The science is very clear. So you want to reduce your exposure. You have a sensitivity to gluten. You don't want gluten because it's causing the tears in the cheesecloth. Not everyone has that reaction because not everyone has crossed the imaginary line with the straw that broke the camel's back. But as I said earlier, if you've got the gene, you just need to check every couple of years because somewhere down the road, you're very likely to come back positive now. And now your body is fighting this monster molecule of gluten. And if I can say right now, Deanna, the problem with gluten sensitivity with or without celiac disease is not gluten. Who cares? My immune system's fighting gluten. I feel fine. So who cares? And there's a lot of people that think that way. The problem is that when you get tears in the cheesecloth, which gluten does every time, when you get tears in the cheesecloth, it is the gateway in the development of the number 3 cause of getting sick and dying in the world, and that's autoimmune diseases. The intestinal permeability is the gateway in the development of autoimmune diseases. So the research is very clear, and this is their language. You can arrest the development of autoimmune disease by healing the intestines, healing the tears in the cheesecloth. That's their language, arresting rheumatoid, arresting lupus, arresting Hashimoto's thyroid disease. And as clinicians, you and I have seen this many, many times where the patient's symptoms go away or they're reduced dramatically. And when you recheck for the antibodies to that autoimmune disease, they're back to normal and they're not getting more tissue damage. That's the problem with gluten. It's not gluten itself, it's the damage it does and the potential down the road. Now, people don't feel when their organs are being attacked and destroyed. I had 3 different tissues in my brain that I had elevated antibodies. So maybe that's why I'm a little nutsy, is because I had 3 tissues in my brain. One was myelin basic protein that causes MS. Another one was cerebellar peptides that causes something called ataxia, where elders can't keep their balance and they can't walk very well. And the third was ganglioside antibodies that causes peripheral neuropathies. I had all 3 elevated in my brain. And I called the lab and said, this is a mistake. No, it's not. Do it again. We did. We know it's you. We did it again. And it's accurate. I said, oh, and that's what woke me up to this whole world of the problems with gluten. So your people need to listen to this little spiel I just did a couple of times. Listen to it 2 or 3 times so that you understand this causes this, causes this, causes this, causes that. And the symptom you get is that. But you've got to go back to the first this and deal with that first this causes this, causes this. You got to go back there and heal the gut. And so you want to stop throwing gasoline on the fire that causes the problem, and then you want to heal the gut.
So if somebody has autoimmune disease, things like multiple sclerosis or Sjogren's or lupus, they should really be looking at what you're speaking to, right, Dr. O'Bryan? This whole sequence of events.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe it is a foundational premise in the world of functional medicine. Just check. You just have to check this because it's so very common as the mechanism that sets someone up for wherever their genetic vulnerability is in terms of what autoimmune disease they develop.
Now, one thing that you mentioned, I took a note here as I was listening to your beautiful journey through the gut. You said that there are 2 things that cause this type of upregulation or this response in the gut. You said it's gluten and it's LPS. Can you talk about LPS a little bit more? What is LPS and why do we need to know about it?
Yes. It stands for lipopolysaccharides. There's 2 categories of bacteria that as humans we're exposed to, and there's no way around it. We're all exposed to it. It's in your food, it's in the water, it's in the air. The categories are gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. And in general, there are families of gram-negative bacteria that are not so good for us, and they can make us really sick. And we're exposed to it every day. There's no way that we're not exposed to it. But our bodies are designed to handle a certain level of this. But when we can't handle it anymore, then LPS, lipopolysaccharides, it is the remnants or the exhaust, if you will, of gram-negative bacteria. So we're all exposed to this gram-negative bacteria. It's broken down in the gut every day. The gram-negative bacteria is broken down by our digestive enzymes, and that's another reason why when you have digestive enzyme deficiency, you can get sick. You can get pretty sick down the road, is this gram-negative bacteria. So LPS, they're large molecules. They're really big molecules, and nothing is supposed to get through the cheesecloth that's larger than about 250 to 400 Daltons. And that's really, really tiny. But LPS gets in the bloodstream, and LPS on average is somewhere around 60,000 Daltons. It's this huge molecule. How did it get in the bloodstream? There's only 4 ways that I know of. One is gingivitis or periodontitis, an infection in your mouth. Another is an open wound on your skin. The third is septicemia, meaning one of your organs has a bad infection in it, and you're really sick if that's happening. And the fourth is intestinal permeability. Those are the only ones that I know of. So if you've got LPS in your bloodstream and you've got antibodies to LPS in your bloodstream, you've got LPS in there. Where did it come from? It most likely came from intestinal permeability. Now, the problem, when our doctors start reading some of the studies on LPS, and I know there's a summit coming soon, they'll be talking about bacteria quite a bit, and it'll include LPS in there. When you start reading the studies, you're shocked that LPS concentrations are a predictor of survival, 5-day survival in intensive care units if someone survives an acute heart attack. If they check LPS levels and they're elevated, they know we got a problem here. We got a big problem. It's a predictor of survival from hepatitis C infections, advanced hepatitis C infections. If your LPS levels are quite elevated, your likelihood of survival is not good. It's associated with so many different brain dysfunctions, from schizophrenia to recurrent depression, where the medications don't work very well. If they've got high LPS levels, that's why the meds aren't doing the job that they're designed to do. Chronic fatigue, there are studies showing complete reversal of one study that I review in my lectures is a 13-year-old girl who became wheelchair bound. She couldn't go to school. She couldn't even think clearly after 3 bouts of antibiotics for a throat infection. And then all of a sudden she became severely chronic fatigued and she couldn't even walk. And it took 2.5 years of dealing with the LPS to get her back to normal. And that's all they did was deal with the LPS and give her some vitamins. LPS can cause as many problems as gluten or more. And it's something that most of us have never heard of before. And you're going to hear a lot more in this next coming year with the summit that's coming.
So what will help us to lower things like our LPS level? What are some other, you mentioned some vitamins there to help with that. Maybe you can talk more peripherally about some other types of modalities or supplements. Just in general, what are ways that we can quell the fire in the gut?
Oh, goodness, yes. So the way of dealing with LPS is to quell the fire in the gut. That's how you deal with it, because you can't reduce, I'm sure you probably could, but we all are going to be exposed to lipopolysaccharides. There's no way around it. That's part of living on the planet. But it's putting the fire out in the gut. How do you put the fire out in the gut? That is the critical component of the gluten summit. And that was my overall umbrella vision. And the questions I asked of every one of my guest speakers, including you, when you so graciously were a part of the summit, is about putting the fire out in the gut. And how do you do that? Well, in terms of nutrition, there are some pieces. There are many, many good things that you can use. And this list is by no means complete. These are the things that have been shown in many studies to be safe and to be effective in more than one arena. The concept is pleiotropism, and that's a really good Scrabble word. So for those of you that need a Scrabble word that'll impress your friends, Do pleiotropic, Pleiotropic. Now, I think that's more than 7 letters, so just cheat. Have an extra card or two. But pleiotropic means coming at the same thing from many different ways. You're trying to turn on genes to achieve a particular result, and there are many different genes that you can turn on. So when you use vitamin D to help put the fire out in the gut, it's really good. But when you use curcumin, it turns on some of the same genes as vitamin D, but it turns on other genes for the same effect. Either turn off some of the fire genes and turn on more of the fire extinguisher genes, but it comes at it from another effect. So you get a more comprehensive. It's an example of 1 + 1 = 3. And you want that 3 approach to put the fire out in the gut. So there's 6 that I talk about that are basic foundational to, and once again, there are many others that you can use. And some of your guests will have products or talk about things that they use that will be just as effective or maybe even more effective than these 6. But these 6 are safe and they've been shown time and time again. And that is curcumin, and that comes in turmeric. So using a little turmeric in your cooking is great, and putting some turmeric in your protein drinks is great, and taking turmeric or curcumin supplements is great. Vitamin D, fish oils, colostrum, glutamine, and probiotics. Those 6 are a really good team to approach most, and certainly I believe the majority of the genes to accomplish the result of less fire, put the fire out, and first stop the fire genes, quiet them down, and then turn on the fire extinguisher genes to put the fire that's already there out. So those 6.
So those 6 again, and I'll just repeat those just to be sure I have them. So you said curcumin, vitamin D, fish oil, colostrum, glutamine, and probiotics. I'm just kind of curious about colostrum. For some of our listeners, they might be thinking, well, doesn't that come from cows, and isn't that considered dairy? So maybe do you just want to quickly state why that would be different than your usual dairy in the store?
You bet. That's a really good question. Thanks for bringing that up. It's a clinical decision on the part of the doctor and the patient. And this is how I approach it. Mrs. Patient, the first 3 days of mother's breast milk is not milk. It's colostrum. Why? What colostrum does is turn on the genes in the baby's gut. Say, okay, baby, it's time to close those tight junctions now. You don't need that intestinal permeability anymore. And all babies have severe intestinal permeability when they're in utero. And at the day of birth, they've got large intestinal permeability. But it closes quickly. Colostrum turns on the lights to activate the genes to close those tight junctions. It also turns on the light to turn on the genes to start making secretory IgA. That's kind of the army in the gut. That's the first line of defense. It also turns on the genes to start building the docking stations for the good bacteria to bind onto, because we want all this good bacteria to be created in our guts to create a nice home for the good bacteria. In the last month, the last trimester of pregnancy, mom's reproductive tract becomes really highly concentrated in a bacteria called Prevotella. And it's normally hardly measurable in the reproductive tract. It's usually just in the gut. But in the last trimester of pregnancy, it becomes really high. I think the highest of all bacteria in the reproductive tract. Why? Because as baby comes down the birth canal, baby gets covered in Prevotella. And what does Prevotella do? Prevotella covering baby gets into its nose, into its mouth, it's just all over its face, and it gets down into baby's digestive tract and turns on genes to say, okay, now the Prevotella that this came from, the mammal, the woman that this Prevotella came from, this is the same person that's going to be sending you your food. And here's the formula of this person's food. So let's build the docking station so we can make the digestive enzymes to break down the food that's about to come to you. And it's this beautiful system that's set up. So what happens when a baby is C-section? Well, baby is not covered in Prevotella. Baby is then covered in the bacteria of the skin, which is strep and other bacteria. So the docking stations that get built in that baby's gut are not for mom's milk. Mm-hmm. It's really for the skin. And those babies tend to have a higher incidence of eczema and allergies and things because their gut didn't get a chance to form right. So some people come up to me afterwards and say, well, doc, my wife had a previous pregnancy and it was a C-section. So the doctor says, we have to have a C-section now. What can we do? Can we take a little of the bacteria from mom's reproductive tract and just rub it in baby's nostrils? And I said, sure. Just do a little Q-tip and, why not? It's certainly not going to hurt them. And it may minimize the amount of the skin bacteria that gets down into baby. Sure. Why not?
Wow. Well, this is very consistent with what we heard from a number of the other experts as well, talking about prenatal care and vaginal births versus C-sections and how important. Dr. Alejandro Younger talked about that, Dr. Michael Stone. So this is all an important message for us to hear. Dr. O'Bryan, we're coming now to the close of our time together, unfortunately, because you have such first of all, a great voice, and I can listen to your information and your knowledge just coming forth. So what I'm wondering if you could do for us is, I know I have my takeaways, but I'm wondering what would be 3 takeaways for the listeners? What are some just quick, actionable points that you want them to take away from everything that you mentioned today?
Well, thank you. But could I just give you one more thing, please?
Yes, please do.
Okay. This is mostly for the doctors, but the patients also. And that is that when we think of detoxification, the most common things we think about are phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver. And they're critically important. However, what most practitioners don't know is the very first phase 1 and phase 2 enzymes that are produced in the epithelial lining of the intestines, in the microvilli, in the shags of the shag carpeting. And in celiac patients, we know that those enzymes, and they're big, long names, they're too long a name for the Scrabble, so I won't even, let's just say UGTs. The UGT enzymes and the glutathione enzymes, there is a 57% reduction in the production of these enzymes in the epithelial lining of the intestines of celiacs. And one of the premises is this one of the reasons why celiacs have such a higher incidence of small intestine and colon cancers? Is because the enzymes that are produced in our body to first break down these toxins from food and from drugs and from medications, those enzymes, there's a 57% reduction in them if you've got this gluten sensitivity causing fire in your microvilli. And that's something that most doctors don't know.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. That's such a nice connection between detoxification systems in the body and the gut. Yes. We normally think of just elimination, but it sounds like there's a lot more there that we have to pay attention to. So that's great information.
Oh, thank you.
So would you be able to summarize? I think it's so hard, isn't it, with all of these goodies? I feel like there's just so much here. And but what are the actionables? What can people do in the short term? What would be your top 3?
You bet. One, please consider that if you don't feel, this is my term for it, if you don't feel like $1 million, if you're working hard to be healthy and you're doing everything that you know that you're supposed to do and you don't feel like $1 million, consider maybe a gluten sensitivity is the culprit here. That's the emergency brake that's keeping you from moving forward and feeling better. And in that case, do the right tests. And we didn't get to talk about that, but that's in my summit. And if you pick up my gluten summit, the website's theglutensummit.com. You can listen to all the experts and we talk about the testing, but it's cyrexlabs.com. That's the only test out there that is completely accurate, looking at Army, Air Force, and Marines. So just consider that test if you aren't feeling like $1 million. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and Deanna, as you know, for the Institute for Functional Medicine, the area that I teach is on healing the gut. It's about intestinal permeability and healing the gut. And that's the second thing, most important. And as the studies show with autoimmune diseases, you can arrest the development of autoimmune disease by healing the gut. That's what the papers say. And so that means stop throwing gasoline on the fire and then put the fire out that's there. The third thing is, and we didn't get a chance to talk about this, so this will be a little pearl that people say, what? What? And then they'll start looking into it more, is that children diagnosed with celiac disease have a 3.2-fold increased risk of long-term mortality with or without a gluten-free diet. It doesn't matter. They still have a 3-fold increased risk of dying early compared to children that don't have celiac. And adults put on a gluten-free diet, they have a 3-fold increased risk of death in the first year on a gluten-free diet. That you cannot just put people on a gluten-free diet. That's a prerequisite first step. But then you have to put the fire out that's there. You have to enhance detoxification pathways, and you have to put the fire out and heal the gut. It's critical that our practitioners know this and know how to do that. So you want to hear more about that, check out theglutensummit.com.
And so the glutensummit.com is one website, and you have another website, right?
I do. Our primary website is thedr.com, THEDR.com, thedoctor.com.
Wonderful. And do you have a practitioner certification program in gluten?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I do. Yes, all things gluten. I do. And our doctors who go through the certification program, they now know why people have a 3.86 increased risk of dying from cancer in the first year after diagnosis, why adults, or they have a 1.86 risk of a heart attack in the first year after diagnosis. They know, and they know how to put the fire out. So we teach our practitioners all of that, and I send them research articles twice a month. I do webinars for them monthly, keeping them on top of what's going on in the world. And that's called our Certified Gluten Practitioners. And the website is thedr.com, where we have more information about that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. O'Bryan. It's really been a pleasure to have you as part of the Detox Summit, because we do see gluten as being an issue, and you talk so beautifully and eloquently about the gut, one of the main organs of detoxification. So thank you again. Really a pleasure to have you as part of this movement. You know, this is the movement to create change in people and then ultimately to create change in the planet. So
amen to that. Well, Dr. Minnick, I want to thank you for the opportunity. It really, it's nice to say thank you, it's an honor. And it's nice to say that, but I really mean it. It's an honor to be a part of your summit and to support your efforts. I've been a big fan of yours for many years and just love your message. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks so much.